everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Ultimate Supply Chain Podcast, where we invite industry leaders to give you an in-depth insight into the changing world of logistics. Now, in a previous episode, we talked about peak just as we were going into the festive season, where there's an obvious uptick in demand. Here we are on the other side of it, and as outbound demand returns to normal, if there is such a thing these days, we see a peak for returns. And that's what we're going to talk about today. With e-commerce on the rise, return is a feature of all of our lives these days. So I'm delighted to have Gaurav Saran, CEO and founder of Reverse Logics, with us today. Reverse Logics is a leading software provider. Gaurav, thanks so much for joining me today and welcome.
Thank you, Lou. Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Before we start, Gaurav, can you tell me, how did you end up working in such a specialised area of supply chain?
I wish I could say that I woke up with this big idea of returns. That's not quite how it went down. I've been in the Silicon Valley software industry for all my career. I started it out with a few large software startups initially when my early days, and then was fortunate to work in the high-tech manufacturing vertical at Microsoft. Between all those experiences, I started to see a small gap at the time around how the reverse logistics in company supply chains weren't necessarily efficient. So that was as much as I saw of the picture at the time. And over the years, it's evolved into a very large industry in general. And the bane around returns, I think we all see it and feel it today.
So were you bright enough to see that pain as a challenge back in the day?
No, I don't think so. I think at that time I would just throw things away, but I think now you got to have a little bit more circularity in the stuff you touch.
Yeah, definitely. So look, returns have definitely become an essential part of a consumer's everyday life. Do you see that level of importance reflected in the supply chain world? Are there specific business strategies around return these days? What are you seeing? What's the trend there?
So when you look at returns, us as consumers, we've all started to participate a lot in the returns journey in general, and it's been a factor of just e-commerce boom, technology usage globally, things like COVID. So the consumer behavior on one side has changed dramatically over the last several years, but from a perspective of the supply chain industry as a whole, the industry hasn't quite woken up to returns as we should be in relation to the explosion on returns, and really goes down to the maturity curve of the different players within the supply chain industry. Some of the innovators, some of the leaders in the industry have adopted the need for innovation around returns, given the fact that 30% of typically all products sold, especially in the apparel and fashion vertical. So there's an evolutionary change that needs to happen, and the level of expertise that people also need to handle returns is evolving.
Right. I mean, I know from our perspective at DHL, we actually have a bunch of people dedicated to returns. Is that typical?
So DHL is definitely one of the leaders in terms of adopting and looking at the future. There are a few other large organizations such as DHL, which are kind of leading the mantle, if you will, on this. So the Reverse Logics, we're seeing a lot of companies, especially typically large enterprise, both brands, biggest brands in the world, they use us today, like Samsonite, Cole Haan, Wilson, a lot of those names, but also a lot of the forward-thinking 3PLs and manufacturers like Electrolux, like yourselves, have started to do that. And that's generally the trend that you'll see as the maturity grows. The pain happens first, and typically industry leaders will come to try to solve that pain, and the rest of the market will start to latch onto that.
Yeah, and look, I referenced up front that this does feel quite a specialist part of the supply chain. Is this something that typically people try to manage themselves through process and then come to you for a technical solution?
Yeah, so it's interesting, if you really think back, returns have always existed. It's just that over the last decade or so, the volume of returns has gone up dramatically. And when you talk about innovation, most organizations were so focused on solving the forward side of the supply chain, because step one for me, or me as a brand, would be, how do I get the consumer the product as quickly?
Yeah. How do I get my stuff?
How do
Yeah.
I get my stuff out there and make sure people are buying it and using it? And
Yeah.
returns come, no worry, I'll put it on a pile. I'll use a legacy homegrown system, maybe an Excel spreadsheet, and someone in the back room will figure it out. That's really what it used to.
Yeah, absolutely. Match them up.
Yeah, just figure it out, right? And largely just gonna sweep it under the rug. But over the last decade or so, especially in the last 5 years, with the explosion in e-commerce in general, if you look at statistics, back in 2022, actually 2021, returns were about $781 billion worth of returns happened globally. That's a very big number. For 2022, that number has crossed $1 trillion just in B2C returns. There's another market on the B2B side, which is close to another $1 trillion worth of returns. That's a really, really big problem. So as those numbers are increasing, and brands that were so focused on getting the product to you, now they're saying, well, the minute a return starts, it's a loss for the brand. Before, the amount of returns wasn't super high per se, so it could be under the rug. But with so many things around economic pressure, supply chain challenges, brands now want to make sure that they can reduce the loss from the returns and maximize the recovery on the goods that are coming back, at the same time offer a premium customer experience. So to your early question on where do we fit in, we've now started to see a lot of these large brands realize that, look, if for my forward fulfillment, where I've got a lot of state-of-the-art technology, but now I'm getting 20-30% or more product coming back, I need a dedicated end-to-end returns management system, because it's a lot to unpack, and you need a platform for that. So we're seeing a lot of the large enterprises, the bigger brands, really go out, take that on, and they're seeing phenomenal results already.
And as you say, that customer experience of having the reassurance that a return will be handled quickly, efficiently. For me, I've got a 25-year-old here, and she makes decisions about who she's going to purchase from based on ease of return. Equally, I've got older members of my family who are worried about making a purchase if they don't think they can return it. So returns is becoming an essential deciding factor in actually placing your e-commerce business.
Yeah, absolutely. And the two groups you mentioned, right? So an interesting stat, about 67% of shoppers that are shopping online make their purchasing decision based on the return policy that they see, right? So if brand, I'm first making sure not only do I get the product back to your daughter or to your grandparents quickly, but to make sure that the experience is matched with the lifestyle, the geography they're in. So if you look at the journey of a return, you can break it into two big parts. One is the post-purchase experience for the consumer. How do I make the experience simple and easy and in line with lifestyle and geography, etc.? And two, when I actually get the product back, how can I maximize the recovery and minimize the loss, right? So having the right strategies in place and offering that is started to become mainstream for most brands today.
So what are you seeing in that space? What are people doing, and what are the drivers? Is this a cost driver? Is it a sustainability driver? What are you seeing from a business perspective when they're building out their return strategy?
Yeah, and the strategy can be different based on product types. So for instance, if you look at apparel and fashion, return rates can be 30-40%. If you look at the generations that are looking at product, they're all used to buying things online on the mobile devices. So one strategy is how do I make not only the shopping experience when they're buying the product, but how do I make sure that experience when they return the product is optimized? So if you look at, most people today do bracketing where, I'll buy 5 shirts and I'll return 4 because I'm testing for color or size. Or, I may just buy something online and, I want to physically return it to a store if I have a store. So what brands need to look at, and what they started to do, is optimizing dynamically the strategy for consumer experience. For instance, I'm a brand, I'm selling a product which is under $30 as an example. Maybe when someone is returning the product, I have strategies in place where instead of shipping the product back, I can have you keep the product just because the cost of shipping it back is higher. Or things like
Sure.
seasonality. You bought something in winter and now it's summertime coming. Your return policy still allows you to send the product back, but sending it, you're selling the same product back at 80% of the value as an example. So you want strategies to take care of that. Or, things like international returns, cross-border documentation, being able to calculate back taxes, being able to offer things like QR codes or drop-off locations. So there's a slew of different things that brands can do that goes to type of product, the location, the industry you're in. So I talked about apparel and fashion. Look at electronics. Electronics, one of the leading return, when you receive the product back, is no fault found. So a lot of times people are sending the product because they couldn't turn it on, as an example. So can you have strategies of not just reducing the return or putting flexibilities in the return process, but can you avoid the return in the first place? So, those strategies are, they encompass different types of products and categories.
And are you seeing all types of sectors consider all types of return strategy? Is this a deliberate strategy, or is this something that people, that brands stumble across once they've realized how complex it is?
No, very good question. So if you step back a little bit on, what should be the return strategy? 3, 4, 5 years ago, there's a lot of noise in the market because people started realizing returns is a thing, and it requires something to happen, right? It was still a thing and something needs to happen. So what it started out with, hey, let's just put a point solution in place to improve the returns initiation component. So the ability for the end user to start the return. That itself is not a return strategy. It's a point solution. So if you look at what should be driving your strategy, is you have to step back and say, okay, what is the journey of a return? So if you look at the entire journey, the first piece is what we call returns initiation. The ability for the end user to create a return request. Now, that should be something not just for the end consumer, but also for a B2B side. Can you do that? Because, we still have a big market on B2B returns, right? Step one is having a dynamic strategy that allows for returns initiation as part of the returns solution that you're thinking about. Something that can cater to a variety of needs that can apply to products, like whether it be apparel or electronic as an example, very different in the way that happens. The second piece is processing of the returns. So when the returns actually come back to a physical location, you need ideally the same system that is opening up the returns initiation component to also close out that initiation in the processing piece. So think 4 walls, you receive the product. So can you make that process efficient and faster? And finally, how do you have the best disposition of the product? Should it go to A stock? Should it go to recycle? Should it go to refurbish? So those are the big components you want to think about. Re-commerce, can you remarket them? And can you also do that sustainably? And can you also do that with a lot of business metrics that you can collect from your returns journey? Because
you touched on a good point there around sustainability. Is that a primary driver now, or what do you see as the primary driver? Is this about having an efficient and effective, and by that I actually mean cost-effective returns mechanism, or are you genuinely seeing sustainability there as a driver of how companies put returns in?
So there are multiple factors that are contributing to sustainability becoming part of the strategic driver for our organization. One, from purely a world perspective, a green earth perspective. I think a lot of brands are realizing that it is part of the social responsibility to incorporate that as part of the strategy. I'm seeing a lot of our customers have roles, such as Chief Sustainability Officer, as an example, that are part and parcel of making a decision around the returns technology platform, because they're responsible to drive those initiatives. Second piece around that is when you do receive the products back, if you have the right technology in place that is looking at returns holistically, can you then dispose off the product in a sustainable way, or can you reutilize the materials in a sustainable way? Can you refurbish the products, bring it back to first quality? all of those things tie into sustainability. So yes, we're seeing an increase in sustainability being a driver. And again, back to maturity curve of an organization, some are crawl, some are walk, some are run. But in that crawl, walk, run example, we're seeing a big jump in organizations realizing that just like you had, for your forward fulfillment, you had a you had a ERP system, an OMS system, maybe a WMS system. Now companies are saying, well, listen, if I'm getting 30% of my products are typically coming back, I need to invest in a dedicated system, which is an RMS, which then fuels the entire journey of my return, not just initiation, but processing, sustainability, remarketing.
And are you seeing a difference in consumer behaviour? Look, we mentioned my family, where I've got a youngster who is careful what she purchases, because actually ideally she'd like a free return, and older relatives who are looking for the surety that they can return, not necessarily in a free way. I've been a bit unfair to the daughter, because I have to say she has started to go, perhaps I shouldn't order so much, because, sustainability is becoming an agenda for her as a consumer. Is that a trend you're seeing as well as a commercial trend?
So first off, your daughter's doing a really good job on that, and if she's returning, it's normal. but it is definitely a trend. That generation is also a lot more conscious around sustainability, and we're seeing that age group actually make a lot of their buying decisions with brands. They want to buy from brands that are more sustainability conscious. So that trend is happening a lot, and the idea would be, how do we enable making sure the returns that tie into sustainability quite well are actually happening programmatically through a system. So yes, brands are paying a lot of attention to that. And that part of the market is very, very sustainability conscious.
Yeah, you talk about how brands are in touch with the return experience. I guess to a certain extent, look, we're just coming out of a festive period. I've definitely experienced more returns than I would normally. And one thing that was interesting that happened over that festive period is I bought my daughter a gift from a well-known online retailer. There was a problem with it. There was a hole in it. I contacted them on a chat line to let them know. They basically said, look, we haven't got another one of those, but we'll refund your money and keep it. So mentioned that to my daughter, and she said, that's because of your returns history. I'm like, what do you mean? And she said, well, they wouldn't have done that for me. They would have asked me to return it. But because you've got such a good history with them, I was amazed. Are all retailers that sophisticated these days?
Not all. The ones that are looking at an RMS system generally are, and really it goes back to there's 3 or 4 different things that happen in the example you just gave. One, the retailer had a lot of insight into the buying or the returning experience or the behavior of the user. And how do you capture that? You can't capture that unless that particular retailer has invested in an end-to-end returns management system. And it is very, very important for that retailer to know the customer's behavior. So that was one important part. So, the term would be, your daughter is considered a frequent flyer in terms of, she's done a lot of returns and maybe be tempted to do some, not so correct returns. So that's an aspect that technology can enable a brand to do. The second would be being able to put in dynamic policies. So in this case, what the brand is doing is saying, listen, as part of your returns journey, when you're initiating the return, it's got some mechanisms, because, you may have said, hey, the brand will typically ask you, why are you returning the product? And you said, well, bad product, it's broken. So brand saying, okay, give me the ability to put a proof of, a picture of the item. So it's giving brands a lot of intelligence. And then the system is intelligent enough at that point to say, you know what, keep the item, because the cost of shipping that product back to you would be pretty high. And then you would be getting a defective item anyway. So again, the role of technology in something like this, and having that end-to-end, if this brand did not have an end-to-end RMS system, one, it would have no visibility into your daughter's returning behavior, as an example, and would not have the ability to put in the right methods in place for, in this case, not having you ship the product back. At the same time, they kept you very happy because they were able to give you instant credit, right? So it's tying into customer experience, it's tying into brand intelligence. And guess what? If you have the right RMS, it can do things like trend analysis for you, where it's saying, well, it's not just your daughter in this example that returned that or wanted to return that defective item. What if you're seeing that trend along other customers? So then you're messaging back to manufacturing saying, well, for that blue shirt, there's a manufacturing defect where it looks like there's a little hole on the right side of the item, preventing the next few returns from coming, and ultimately brand losing money in this case, right? Not only did you lose the sale, you also couldn't really do anything with the item that you sold. So there's a lot of things. If you look at returns, it's a much bigger piece than sometimes brands or people thinking about returns understand.
And to be honest, that whole experience had a massive impact. I mean, I hate to be dull about it, but it had a massive impact. I was thinking about the whole psychology around it. When she told me that I was possibly getting a better experience than she was, there was an element of gamification, and I'm like, oh great, I'm being rewarded for doing the right thing. My next step was, hang on, what are you doing wrong? What are you doing with the returns process that means that you might not get the same experience? And she said to me, typically, Mum, I'm a bit rubbish. I let returns pile up and I return them all together, so I'm a bit late. Now, clearly, they know that too. So you're absolutely right. This is another example in the supply chain where data analytics and using that data and analytics in an intelligent way has a huge and positive impact on customer experience.
Absolutely. And this is very common across the board where you want to offer your premium customers a premium experience. And then customers that may misuse the policies, if you don't have the right system in place, you would never know that you have people that are policy abusing, which is happens if you don't put the right guardrails. It will happen. So brands are waking up to that concept, and 3PLs, which are supporting the brands, are also realizing, well, if they want to offer that level of sophistication for the brand to let them handle their products, they need a system to accommodate that.
Yeah, I wonder how sophisticated it can get, because in all of that experience, the returns are still free to me. If I'd opted and I was given the option still to return the item because it was defective, even though they'd refunded it, so why I would, I don't know. But it does make me wonder whether there's something people can do with the returns process that encourages people to shop more consciously.
Yeah, there's a lot of strategies that people are trying to do. You can employ things like exchanges as an example is one way, or return avoidance is another way. Especially if you look at the electronics area, I mentioned an example earlier where, when people are returning product, if I just made a mistake, I didn't know how to turn the product on, as an example, or I'm sending something back because there's a small scratch on the watch strap, as an example. Can I send you a DIY kit? So you can just put the strap yourself. So being able to have multiple strategies at your fingertips is another key area where a technology platform can allow you to do that. Another trend that we're seeing is companies and brands are constantly trying out new ways to tackle returns. A lot of the leading brands today are trying to implement things like why don't we do you have to pay for a return. Now, if you're a very large brand, you may be able to get away with it. But how would that affect your experience as a consumer, given the fact that you are looking at how easy returns are? Or in your example, when there was actually a defective product that came back from the brand, and if you have to pay for that, you'd probably be pretty upset as a consumer, right? On the other hand, you may say, well, it's better to game the system and just say, hey, the return reason is it's effective. So there's a lot of those things that are in motion, and the goal really from a technology platform should be as the industry continues to evolve, and we're looking at different aspects in managing the reverse journey. Having the right technology investment in an RMS platform that can truly allow you to look at the whole journey of the return becomes even more critical, because you can make adjustments across the board and you have the visibility from the start to the finish of the return.
Yeah, I completely get it. And I mean, the other thing that amazes me is how lazy I've become around the returns process, because frankly, I'm a bit irritated if I have to write a returns label. I'm a bit irritated if I need to print a label and I can't just take it to the post office or wherever with a barcode. I'm a bit irritated if I have to fill out a bit of paper listing the reason for return. I mean, what more do I want really? Is that typical, or am I just very, very lazy?
No, that is very, very typical. And, that's where the sophistication of a solution allows you to remove that hurdle from you, because it will affect your buying decision with the brand. The brands that can solve for this, making it easier. So, we have brands that are using QR codes as an example. They have drop-off locations. A lot of large companies are coming with in-home pickup service for you now. You've heard some of the announcements from some of the big carriers lately. So there's a multitude of things that can happen. In Europe, printers are not as commonly used, as other parts, as an example. So people like the idea of a QR code. Or, if I'm starting a return and I know that there's a drop-off location near my house, maybe a mile down, it may be easier for me to just drop it off or do things like, bagless returns. So all of those strategies, again, it really goes down to, are you as the brand or the 3PL partner that you're using to support your fulfillment and returns, do you have the right technology system in place that can allow for all of these different capabilities based on product, region, and the value of the product as well?
And the sort of technology that's emerging around returns, and so I get it, that there must be some sort of scanning mechanism in, scanning mechanism out. But that large retailer that I talked about earlier, they seem to be super sophisticated. So what I receive for them, if I receive 3 parcels and I've got 3 returns, I can return them in one parcel, and it doesn't seem to be reliant on what I say online. Is it some sort of, what are they doing? Are they weighing it? How do they know what I'm returning? How are they matching that up? Is that part of the technology?
It is a technology solution. It's actually quite simple. It really goes back to the platform. The initiation, which I talked about earlier, the front end is actually connected to the processing, so you can actually start and close out the RMA. And it can also detect things like underages and overages, for example. What if you packed 1 extra by mistake? The system will know that you've actually sent 1 more. Or you claim you're going to return 1 item, but you send them a box of cookies, as an example, right? So fraud that comes in. So all of that is a factor of technology and having the right system. Another point that came up with one of our customers was they want to make sure you as the consumer, you still want to be able to get the credit back as quickly as possible. Aligned with the consumer experience. But the brand wants to make sure that when you receive the product, whether it's at a drop-off location or a consolidation point, how quickly can you verify that it is the right product, especially with higher value.
Right.
If you're getting a Prada backpack, you want to make sure it's the genuine one. So can you do all of that? And allowing for that is another big piece of the technology platform. As I mentioned earlier, historical investment with brands or 3PLs has really been around. I need a order management system as a brand. I probably need a ERP system. If I'm doing my own physical handling, I need a WMS system. And these are the I'll try to do return with. And all the examples we've talked about so far are not possible in those systems, right? So the fourth puzzle, that big piece is now, given the volume of returns, having an end-to-end returns management system allows you to do all of the different capabilities we've been discussing so far.
Yeah, and look, I referenced the fact that I'm slightly irritated by having to tick a box to give a reason for my return, but it also made me think about why I was having to tick a box and what was happening as a result of me ticking the box. So I think genuinely it's a fascinating subject. I'm a bit embarrassed to say how fascinated I am by it, but I completely understand how having asked you that question, how did you end up in this very specific part of logistics? I get it. And I think perhaps given that it plays such a huge part in our lives these days, the people who get this right are going to enjoy huge benefits in terms of customer experience and customer loyalty. It will keep me coming back.
Absolutely. The customer loyalty is such an important aspect. People typically will tend to go back to brands that are giving them a consistent experience. And these are things that have been well documented and reported on. And as I keep going back to, if you're looking at a typical 30% return rate, if you haven't figured that out, you're gonna lose so much money. 30% of your products are coming back. Can you imagine that as a brand? close to a $2 trillion market next year between B2B and B2C sales. And we haven't really touched on B2B quite a bit, but that's also a really, really big segment of product coming back.
How does it differ? What differences are you seeing in B2B against B2C?
So the big difference between B2B and B2C is on the B2B side, typically the brand or the manufacturer is getting the product back from some sort of a retailer or a dealer that is sending them product back in bulk. So instead of getting onesie, twosie returns, you're getting these big pallets. And what happens in that aspect is when you're getting these returns back, it is hard to do all the validations on those returns because they're generally coming in big pallets. And you'll see a lot of these products will typically just sit somewhere in a warehouse and nothing will happen to them properly. They won't get put back into stock at the right time. They will not be disposed of at the right time. And for the manufacturers or the brands that are returning the product, they have issues around contra credits. So the loss on those is very, very high and, hasn't really been solved for historically as much. But we've got some very large customers in the B2B space, such as Electrolux as an example, where they've been able to implement the right systems to reduce the loss from the returns again and maximizing the recovery.
Yeah, because I imagine the risk of loss is obviously far greater in terms of its value in a B2B scenario. But again, that experience is critical because you do want to make sure that it's your inventory is up to date at all times.
Yeah, and we've had such such challenging times with supply chain in general. So being able to get the inventory back quickly and being able to do something with the returned product, whether it's, especially if it's electronics as an example, then, can I harvest parts? Can I put it back into first quality very quickly? All of those things need to be enabled through a technology platform.
So thanks, Gaurav. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Just to wrap things up, I'll ask you the $64 million question. How do you see the future of e-commerce evolving? What are the trends going to be like in the future around returns, rise of lockers and re-commerce? How do you see that evolving?
So first of all, I think it's going to be a $2 trillion question as far as the market is concerned. So a couple things. One, I see the future as more companies will, most brands and 3PLs will all start to utilize an RMS solution. The market is already there. On all the leaders in the market are already taking that foot forward. So that would be one. Second, sustainability is going to continuously drive the return space a lot. Not only because the consumers want it, but it's dictated by how we want to dispose of the product. Can we recycle and reuse? And it also ties into things around supply chain challenges. So that would be a big factor. The third would be a growing focus on re-commerce, where if you look at last year, there was a growth in re-commerce from about $13.5 billion worth of re-commerce activity in 2018 to about $28 billion in 2022. That's a big jump. And 2023, that's supposed to go up another 15%. So that market has gone up a lot, and you'll see a lot of brands coming out with exclusively reset or selling secondhand goods. All of that is taken into account. Another interesting stat for 2022 is about 100 new re-commerce initiatives were launched across a variety of brands. 77 of the 100 happened last year. So that is, that's on the rise. And, if you look at how, re-commerce, circular economy, and looking at returns as a holistic reverse logistics math problem to solve, just like we've had so much innovation on the forward fulfillment of the item. And I keep going back to, listen, if you're looking at a 30% return rate, that is a really, really big market for you to address. And the loss on the returns, I keep going back to, is a lot if you're not able to reduce that and keeping in line with the customer experience. So those would be the three big trends and predictions from my side.
Awesome. I think that would completely align with certainly some of my colleagues here in DHL Supply Chain. My colleague Scott Allison has spent so much time and energy, a recent conference we were at, so much time and energy talking about the circular economy, drilling that into us, making sure we understand how things could be in the future and how we're going to respond to it. I think we could do a whole nother session just talking about circular economy. But for now, Gaurav, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure geeking out with you around the whole subject of returns and how they might evolve in the future. So thank you so much for being with me today.
My pleasure, and thank you very much.
Thanks to you for tuning in. Please subscribe if you want to hear more of the Ultimate Supply Chain podcast. Give us your feedback. Let us know what you'd like us to tackle in the future. Thanks again.